When I first heard the news that Oatly was canceled, I was heartbroken, but as a vegan, I knew if Oatly was actually aiding in any way rainforest deforestation or human rights violations, I could not support them. That would be pretty counterproductive to any goals of protecting the environment and reducing suffering. But just as a longtime fan of Oatly, I wanted to do some final research before coming to my decision, which ballooned into a personal project I've worked on and off on for the past month. So thank you if you're watching this, my efforts have not been in vain. So, in July, popular oat milk company Oatly sold a $200 million stake, which is 10% of their company, to a group of high-profile investors, including and led by private equity firm Blackstone. A private equity firm is basically an investment middleman. They gather money from really wealthy players called limited partners, and they invest it into their own curated portfolio. Oatly is now a part of Blackstone's investment portfolio. Private equity firms also often do full-on buyouts of a company, so although 10% may seem like a lot, it's actually on the lower end. Now, I am not here to debate whether Blackstone has made unethical investments. What I am here to debate is whether boycotting Oatly accomplishes the goals we set out to do in boycotts, i.e., leverage our power as consumers to catalyze a market shift. Now, I hate to be the bearer of unpleasant reminders, but I want to contextualize this video within the fact that we live in an exploitative capitalist economy. There is no moral purity in our current economy, and seeking the fulfillment of our highest ideals within consumerist activism is a doomed mission. And this is best demonstrated by examining the brands currently being suggested as ethical alternatives to Oatly. I was really surprised to see people mention Chobani. They're literally a dairy company, so they've historically and continue to profit off a super unsustainable and unethical industry. Planet Oat is owned by HB Food, a 200-year-old monolith dairy company. Califia just had an investment round led by Qatar's state-owned investment fund. Qatar has a bunch of human rights issues. Silk, owned by Danone, a multinational dairy corporation that also funds pro-dairy studies through its quote-unquote charitable foundation and engages in unethical marketing. So Delicious, also owned by Danone. Forager, invested in by Danone. Rice Stream, owned by Hain Celestial Group, that owns a chicken factory farm that recently poisoned its workers. Almond Breeze fought its workers trying to unionize. Found in violation of federal labor law. Trader Joe's was sued for wage theft. The list goes on, and if you're feeling good because your favorite brand wasn't among these, that just means I didn't think to research it, or it's a smaller brand because, and this is my main argument, you cannot achieve market success on moral purity. And the reason why is because our economy is so thoroughly unethical that even if you are an ethical company yourself, to enter the mainstream, you need to partner with a number of major gatekeepers to the market, whether it be at the stage of production, investment, or retail. And these gatekeepers have inevitably been doing a lot of business with other unethical businesses because most of our economy functions without any care for the rights of humans and non-human animals and the environment. The thing is, I understand the intuitive reaction to stay a mile away from any company like Blackstone. We think of boycotts as, I want to put my money towards the good companies, the most ethically pure companies, and stay away from these bad ones. But the reality of our economy is more like this. We aren't dealing with individual separate businesses with their own product. They all own each other or are investing in each other. And these big players have their hand in every pot. The economy is controlled by a handful of these corporations and firms that gatekeep the choices we have, which are essentially you buy this product from us or this other product from us. And this is the limitation to consumer activism. And by the way, making your own oat milk, if you buy the oats at a grocery store, just so you know, the oat industry is not any more detached from exploitative capitalism than the oat milk industry. There are ways to circumvent the system, but these haven't shown themselves to really be large-scale market shifters, usually because of accessibility and affordability, because people are poor, because they're not being paid living wages by the same corporate crowd. You see, capitalism actually diminishes the freedom of choice on the consumer end, where consumers are disempowered and living paycheck to paycheck, and also on the supply end, because a truly free market cannot exist while corporations have the unmitigated power to rule over us with monopolies and oligarchies. The thing is, we intuitively understand our limits in consumer activism when we're at the retail stage. A grocery store stocks products of all kinds, ranging from the less ethical to the more ethical, just like a private equity firm invests in all types of companies, from the less ethical to the more ethical. And we engage in consumer activism, buying the vegan product, the more ethical product, sending a message to the grocery store, and in turn, they increase their supply of that product, and we celebrate that. We celebrate when the vegan section at a grocery store expands, even though we are simultaneously simultaneously supporting a gatekeeper institution that stocks all sorts of non-vegan products and therefore most definitely profits off of factory farming, animal abuse, deforestation, pollution, worker abuse, etc. Grocery store capitalism is arguably worse because they don't just deal with bad actors, they are bad actors themselves. So why draw the line at investment capitalism, which follows the same model of a comparatively smaller vegan company partnering with a major, morally problematic gatekeeper to leverage an entry into the mainstream market? This is why I think people pushing us to boycott Oatly don't even get credit for being too ideologically pure. There is no ideology because there is no consistency. Are they calling on us to not buy from major grocery stores, to boycott every brand that has ever sold at those grocery stores? These so-called activists have simply not done their research on how our moral purity is basically automatically compromised in this society. And, I see vegans celebrating fast food chain stocking vegan options, which is worse than both of these things. You cannot get more exploitative, more lecherous than America's fast food industry. But these are forms of capitalism that we have become desensitized to. We engage in them so casually, while investment capitalism seems more mysterious and malevolent, even though they are all malevolent. We have to always keep in mind that when we consume our quote-unquote ethical products, some money is always going to the gatekeeper institution and keeping all its unethical purchases running, and its psychopathic CEOs. But our ethical corner of the market will also expand, thus reducing harm and making these products more accessible. The same logic flows in investment. And so, in the same vein, requiring Oatly to only partner with firms that only handle green, ethical investments that have literally 1% of the capacity of Blackstone is like asking them to only sell at local vegan co-ops rather than mainstream grocery stores. Is that a viable path for the major change we need to make veganism more accessible and also reduce harm? And now I want to quickly go over why I think this transaction is actually a really good thing before I talk about how corporate veganism cannot be our end goal. So first off, there's the fact that the vegan section in the metaphorical Blackstone supermarket has expanded, and this means less harm done, as Oatly is able to grow faster and displace more dairy cartons with oat cartons, thus helping the environment and reducing the suffering of dairy cows. And you might say, well, not necessarily, because plant-based isn't always better, but yes, necessarily it is. This study didn't show oat milk, but oat milk has a similar sustainability profile to soy milk, so bear with me. The most environmental, local, etc. dairy milk is still less sustainable than the least sustainable soy milk. And this is from the most comprehensive study on food and the environment. And no matter how nice your farm is, cows produce milk for their babies to drink. So if you're drinking cow's milk, it means some baby cow didn't get it. And I know there may be some way to only sell the excess milk or not kill the baby calves, which is usually what happens, but considering how small the profit margin for dairy farmers is already, I don't think this model is scalable. And this point on harm reduction is especially salient for Oatly because it's not just an option for vegans, it's known as a popular displacement product for dairy drinkers. And I know prioritizing short-term harm reduction may seem like a cop-out, but any less harm done is crucial because we are running out of time in the case of the climate crisis, and in the case of animal rights, the worst of the crisis is already upon us in the form of factory farming. And on the topic of less harm, there was another deal Oatly did last year with China Resources, which people didn't like because they're a Chinese government-owned firm. But China veering away from its current trajectory towards a Western diet and instead towards a plant-based one is the avoidance of a catastrophe. It is a huge harm reduction. The second thing is that if Blackstone wasn't investing in Oatly, they would probably be investing in something that is actually deforesting the Amazon and committing human rights violations. So the fact that Oatly is taking up any amount of Blackstone's pot that would otherwise be used for dubious purposes is good. So the many people that are blaming Oatly directly for Blackstone's other investments that perhaps Oatly has even served to displace are so disingenuous because the whole point is that Blackstone is making an investment in Oatly and not those other types of investments. So the third thing is that Blackstone is kind of a big deal in the investment world. And to the people that say they won't convince Blackstone to be better, no, obviously not. That is not how titans of the industry operate. They are not directed by moral compasses. And frankly, I don't want wishy-washy corporate sustainability commitments from Blackstone, but I can rely on their greed. The fact that something showing itself to be profitable, like Oatly showing sustainable investments to be profitable, will influence their business decision-making. So you may wonder, why is growth so important? Well, at this point in time, growth for Oatly is especially important because they are still a very small company. And believe me, despite what it may feel like to some people, Oatly is in fact a small company. They are just one player in the oat milk industry, which is only 8% of the plant-based milk industry, which is only 14% of the total milk industry. So growth will enable them to benefit from economies of scale, i.e. the more you make of something, the greater efficiency with which you can make it. The thing they also seem to be struggling with the most is meeting demand, and with a big player like Blackstone, this investment round was able to be their biggest one yet and enabled them to build factories in Europe, US, and Asia, which is also important from a sustainability perspective because one of the things driving up their per liter carbon footprint was transportation, and having more facilities would assumedly drive that down. Another thing about being a newer and smaller industry is that the ingredients you're using are not specifically made for the needs of that product, so the quality and the cost of that product suffers. Fifth, people were talking about Blackstone's greenwashing, but who is following Blackstone on social media? If you are unironically following a private equity firm on social media, if that's the content you enjoy, you're not someone that didn't like Blackstone and now thinks they're okay by association to Oatly. You're someone that probably didn't know about Oatly and now likes them in association to Blackstone. This would actually serve as an introduction of ethical investing to a more conservative crowd. But of course, I am not anti-boycott. I mean, I'm vegan, so clearly not. But my position regarding boycotts is that in this economy, we should be drawing lines regarding production ethics, but not partner ethics, i.e. not who the company partners with, because to grow fast as a company, you have to partner with morally dubious actors, but we should be drawing lines when we can on the concrete impacts of a product. And that's not just the environmental footprint or not exploiting animals, but workers' rights, women's rights, etc. And on this front, Oatly is pretty darn good. Researching for this, it was funny to me because companies will literally advertise when they follow the law or whatever the fuck this is, but it's in green, and you have Oatly here doing all of this, and yet they use their packaging space to wax at length about environmental philosophy. And explaining all the stuff they're doing made this video unnecessarily long because you can just pause and read the slides I made. And of course, Oatly is not perfect, but they are more ethical and also more transparent about the problems they do have than any other company I researched. They are head and shoulders above even other plant-based competitors in production ethics, and I think the hype surrounding them denotes the fact that they are also head and shoulders above their competitors in the quality and appeal of their product. And that is the best you can hope for under capitalism, is supporting an appealing product made relatively ethically. Focus on the ethics of production. Partner ethic litmus tests will only serve to place a ceiling above plant-based companies and our movement. They relegate us to be fringe while also accomplishing no concrete reduction of suffering. And this is the limitation to corporate veganism, right? It can't challenge the underlying concentration of wealth and power, and no single product will ever successfully do that. So while I hope this can be a lesson to keep purist ideals out of our consumer activism, I also hope this can be a lesson that corporate veganism will not be our end-all savior. So instead of hinging all our hopes on vegan companies like Oatly and market-based consumerist veganism in general, we need to realize that we need to expand past just seeing vegan activism as a consumerist activity and do vegan activism as a citizen, as an organizer, as an educator. Because we don't want our right to a livable future or someone's right to live free of unnecessary suffering to be decided by market whims, always at risk. So I will defend Oatly, but I am not defending corporate veganism as some kind of savior. I mean, it's unlikely, but what if Oatly's leadership changes and their production ethics become corrupted? Or the new investments Blackstone makes are just greenwashing companies that turn an easier profit instead of legitimately more ethical ones like Oatly. At the end of the day, leaving something to the market makes it so that the most important things are always up for grabs because the most important things are not included in the price of a product. And when you leave these things up to the market, it's not just left up to chance. The market leans away from being ethical because it's usually cheaper to pretend to be ethical than to actually be ethical. This is the constant tension in unregulated capitalism, chasing the bottom line versus the public good. And we need to be agitating for a whole host of not just agriculture-specific policy change, but governmental policy change to get corporate interests out of politics. Vegans need to be getting more political. And the best part is, you can simultaneously pursue different strategies of change. And again, we already do this in other contexts. We understand this when we engage in grocery store capitalism, even investment capitalism in non-Oatly contexts like fossil fuel divestment, which is usually followed by a call for reinvestment in renewables. That is a capitalist solution, but you see pretty leftist organizations calling for it as well. It's comparable to voting as well. Arguably, we don't live in a functioning democracy, but you vote anyways. You can pursue intermediary solutions within the current framework while also challenging the framework itself to change. Now, some words on the unfolding of this controversy. I hate how boycotting Oatly has practically become a meme at this point. It's just assumed that if you're ethical, you should boycott Oatly, and it's really only a small handful of posts that seem to have created this trend. And yes, the internet's favorite pastime is making fun of vegans and veganism, so it's unsurprising that these posts went viral. But the responsibility is also on the content creator. If you are a content creator, it is incumbent on you to do your research, to present important nuance. I also think there is a problem with our modern social platforms catering to our ever-diminishing attention spans, and therefore not being conducive towards presenting nuanced, more long-winded information. And by the way, if you trace this all the way back, these viral TikToks and tweets came out after this Instagram post, which in turn cites an article about there being controversy with Oatly, and the main criticism they cite is a Swedish article, which if you translate it, is a pro-dairy article. I mean, it's unsurprising, like who else would dig up a non-issue about an oat milk company besides the dairy industry? And I have to say, if you have researched all the facts of this situation and you still think boycotting Oatly accomplishes the purpose of an effective boycott, I find this pursuit of moral purity in a product or a company to be weirdly both unrealistically idealistic and also very capitalist. This experience also taught me that just because you've subverted the mainstream to become leftist or vegan doesn't mean that herd mentality can't also operate within leftist, environmental, vegan circles. So if you are not well researched on an issue, it's okay to not have an opinion, to not speak on it. So I hope this video provided a new perspective. I do not want an effectively ethical company like Oatly or any future company that is trying to get into the mainstream to have to take flack for growing in what is unfortunately right now the only way that is currently possible, which is within a capitalist framework. I really appreciate anyone who watched this far. Thank you so much. Goodbye.